It started as an ordinary afternoon in Willow Creek, a quiet suburban neighborhood where the sunlit streets, white picket fences, and neatly trimmed lawns painted the picture of perfect peace. Parents chatted casually while walking their dogs. Children rode their bikes, and neighbors exchanged polite smiles over mailboxes. It was the kind of place where everyone assumed safety came naturally, where trust wasn't questioned but silently promised. But behind those manicured hedges and cheerful greetings, something darker was brewing, something no one saw coming. Studies show that nearly 1.7 million packages are stolen every single day in the U.S. That means somewhere, right now, someone is taking what doesn't belong to them. But what happens when that someone isn't a stranger lurking in the shadows, but the very people you thought you could trust the most? The story begins with Karen and her husband, neighbors who had lived in Willow Creek for almost 7 years. To anyone on the outside, they were the picture of suburban bliss. Karen, a middle-aged woman with soft hazel eyes and a warm laugh that made everyone feel comfortable, and Mark, her tall, quiet husband, who mowed his lawn twice a week and waved at anyone passing by. To the people around them, they were the kind of couple everyone wanted as neighbors, dependable, trustworthy, and always ready to lend a helping hand. But appearances can be deceiving. Just 3 houses down lived Emily and her husband, David, the quiet, reserved couple, who mostly kept to themselves but were always polite. They had recently started an online business, which meant packages were constantly arriving at their doorstep, some small, some large, each one containing products they sold to customers nationwide. It was their dream slowly turning into reality, a source of pride after years of planning, saving, and sacrificing. Every delivery represented more than just merchandise. It represented progress, security, and hope for a better future. But then, the packages began disappearing. It started slowly at first, a single missing box here and there, brushed off as a possible delivery mishap. Emily called a courier company, filed complaints, and assumed the problem was out of anyone's control. But soon the incidents multiplied. Week after week, she'd receive confirmation emails saying her items had been delivered. Yet when she opened the door, the porch was bare. At first, Emily wanted to believe the best in people. After all, Willow Creek wasn't the kind of place where things like this happened. But her unease grew with every missing package. She couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that this wasn't just random, someone was deliberately taking them. David, her husband, was furious but logical. "It's probably kids," he told her one evening as they stood staring at their empty porch. "Teenagers messing around. We'll set up a camera and catch whoever's doing it." Emily nodded, but deep down she wasn't so sure. There was something strange in the air lately. Small, subtle shifts in how people acted. Little changes in behavior she couldn't quite explain. The same neighbors who once greeted them warmly now avoided eye contact. Conversations felt forced, and Karen had started acting differently too. It began with small things. Karen used to stop by often, borrowing sugar, chatting about neighborhood gossip, and sharing recipes. But over the last few weeks, she had grown oddly distant. When Emily waved from across the street, Karen would smile faintly, but never cross over like she used to. And Mark, quiet, polite Mark, seemed even quieter now, hardly leaving the house except to drag their trash cans to the curb. Emily told herself she was overthinking it. After all, these were good people, trustworthy people, friends, or so she thought. The turning point came one Thursday afternoon. Emily had been waiting for an important delivery, an expensive set of limited edition merchandise worth nearly $1,200. It was the biggest order they had processed since starting their business, and they needed it urgently. She stayed home all day, checking the tracking number every few hours, her excitement building as the status updated to "out for delivery." By evening, the notification finally popped up. "Package delivered, front porch." But when she opened the door, there was nothing there. Emily froze, her stomach sinking like a stone. She checked the tracking again, convinced that there had been some mistake, but the details were correct. The package was supposed to be on her porch, and it wasn't. Her heart began to race as she scanned the street looking for anyone nearby. That's when she saw it across the road. Karen's curtain falling shut. Just a flicker of movement, so subtle that most people wouldn't notice. But Emily did. She couldn't explain why, but something in that moment made her suspicious. That night, she and David finally decided to install a camera. 2 days later, the truth began to unravel, and it was far worse than Emily had imagined. The footage revealed a figure walking briskly up to their porch around 2:17 p.m. The person bent down, grabbed the package, and hurried away hood up, head low. But it wasn't a stranger, and it wasn't a group of mischievous teenagers. The video wasn't crystal clear, but the distinctive jacket, the way the man walked, there was no mistaking it. It was Mark, Karen's husband. Emily stared at the footage in shock, her mind refusing to believe what her eyes were showing her. Her neighbors, her friends, the people she had trusted implicitly, were stealing from her. And in that single moment, the safety she once felt in Willow Creek shattered completely. But the story didn't end there, because the footage, as damning as it was only the beginning. The truth went deeper, much deeper than a simple stolen package. Behind Karen's polite smiles and Mark's quiet demeanor lay secrets no one in Willow Creek had ever imagined. And Emily was about to uncover them all. Willow Creek was the kind of neighborhood people dreamed about: quiet streets lined with oak trees, neatly painted houses with tidy porches, and a sense of familiarity that made life feel safe. For years, Emily and David believed that they had found their sanctuary there. After leaving the chaos of the city, they wanted peace, stability, and a community where people looked out for one another. For a long time, that's exactly what they had. From the day they moved into their pale blue 2-story house, Karen had been one of the first neighbors to welcome them. She arrived carrying a basket of fresh-baked muffins, smiling warmly as though that they'd known each other for years. "We're so glad to have you here," she had said, her voice soft and genuine. Mark, her husband, had waved from across the yard, quiet, reserved but polite, the kind of man who always offered to help move a heavy box or fix a loose fence panel. Emily liked Karen immediately. They'd spend mornings chatting over coffee on the porch, trading stories about recipes, gardening, and life in general. Karen had a way of making people feel comfortable, like she truly listened. And in those early days, Emily believed she'd found not just a neighbor, but a friend. For years, the four of them, Emily, David, Karen, and Mark, lived side by side without conflict. There were neighborhood cookouts, casual dinners, and shared laughter over minor inconveniences, like when squirrels tore apart Karen's bird feeders, or when David accidentally set off the community sprinkler system trying to install his garden hose. Life was simple, safe, predictable, until the deliveries started. Emily and David had recently launched an online business selling handmade products, something they poured months of planning, late nights, and hard-earned savings into. Slowly, orders began to pick up, and with that came a constant stream of packages boxes arriving nearly every other day, with supplies, custom materials, and specialty items they couldn't afford to lose. At first, Emily thought nothing of it. After all, this was Willow Creek. People didn't steal from one another here. Packages had always been left safely on porches, untouched until their rightful owners collected them. But soon she started noticing strange little details she couldn't quite explain. The first package went missing on a Tuesday morning. A small box, nothing valuable, but unexpected nonetheless. Emily assumed the delivery service made a mistake. She called customer support, filed a claim, and forgot about it. Then another package disappeared, and another. By the time the fourth one vanished, Emily's frustration had turned into unease. The tracking numbers always showed the same thing: delivered. Yet when she stepped outside, there was nothing. No box, no note, no sign of an error. David suggested they ask around the neighborhood. Maybe someone accidentally grabbed the wrong package. Emily hesitated at first, embarrassed by the thought of making a fuss, but eventually she did. That was when Karen's behavior started to change. The first time Emily asked her about the missing packages, Karen's reaction was strange too quick, too dismissive. "Oh no, I haven't seen anything," she said, avoiding eye contact as she rearranged the potted plants on her porch. "Probably some kids messing around." It wasn't just the words. It was the way she said them, her voice a little too calm, her smile a little too tight, as though she was trying to hide something. Emily brushed it off at first, convincing herself she was overthinking things. Karen was her friend. Mark was trustworthy. There was no reason to suspect them. But deep down, an uncomfortable thought had begun to take root, one she didn't dare say out loud. The tension grew slowly, creeping into every casual interaction. When Emily waved at Karen from across the street, Karen would wave back, but her hand lingered awkwardly midair, like she wasn't sure whether to acknowledge her at all. Mark stopped chatting with David entirely, retreating into silence whenever he saw him outside. And then there were the whispers. One evening, as Emily was bringing in the trash cans, she overheard two neighbors talking quietly at the corner. "Packages have been disappearing all over the neighborhood," one of them said, her voice sharp and hushed. "I heard someone thinks they know who it is." Emily froze, holding her breath. As her pulse quickened, she wanted to ask, but the women walked away before she could. That night, lying awake beside David, Emily replayed every interaction she'd ever had with Karen and Mark, searching for signs she might have missed. Had Karen always been this distant? Had Mark always been this secretive? Or had something changed? The next morning, as she caught another glimpse of Karen through the window, standing in her driveway, staring off into the distance, there was something strange in her expression. Not guilt exactly, but unease, like someone living with a secret too heavy to carry. Emily's instincts told her something was wrong. Still, she wanted so badly to believe in the world she thought she lived in, a world where neighbors didn't betray neighbors and friendships didn't fracture over greed. She told herself she was imagining things, that this wasn't what it looked like. But then came the Thursday delivery, the one that changed everything. Emily had been waiting all week for this package, an order worth over $1,000, critical for fulfilling her biggest batch of customer requests yet. She cleared her schedule, stayed home the entire day, and refreshed the tracking page every hour. When the notification finally appeared, "Delivered front porch," her excitement lasted only seconds. She opened the door, expecting to see the box sitting there, but once again, nothing. She stood frozen on the porch, her breath caught in her throat, scanning the street for any sign of movement. That's when she noticed Karen's curtain fluttering slightly, as though someone had just let it fall back into place. A chill ran through her. That small, fleeting moment planted a seed of doubt she could no longer ignore. Emily didn't want to believe it, couldn't believe it, but as the days passed, her mind kept circling back to Karen and Mark, their shifting behavior, the unspoken tension, the way they avoided eye contact as though hiding something they couldn't confess. David, sensing her unease, finally said the words Emily hadn't been able to. "It's someone close, Em. Someone here. We need to find out who." And so, for the first time since moving to Willow Creek, Emily began to see her perfect little neighborhood differently. The streets didn't feel as safe anymore. The smiles felt less genuine, and the trust she once gave so freely had begun to crumble. The foundation of friendship was cracking, and soon it would shatter completely. Because Emily and David were about to discover a truth they never imagined. And once they did, nothing in Willow Creek would ever be the same again. Emily sat at the edge of her bed, staring at the delivery confirmation email glowing on her phone screen. Her chest tightened as the same dreaded words appeared again. "Delivered front porch." She didn't move immediately. Her heart pounded as she stared at the message, her breath shallow, knowing exactly what she'd find outside. Finally, forcing herself up, she walked to the front door and pulled it open. Nothing. No box, no package. Not even a hint that something had been there at all. For a moment, she just stood there on the porch, frozen, her eyes scanning the driveway and street beyond. The air felt heavier than usual, the silence louder, almost mocking her. Somewhere in the distance, a lawnmower hummed, but here everything felt still, like the neighborhood was holding its breath. Behind her, David stepped onto the porch, his jaw tightening when he saw the empty space. "That's the third one this week," he said, his voice sharp with frustration. 3, Emily. And these aren't small packages anymore. That was $600 worth of supplies gone. Emily's throat tightened. She nodded slowly, her eyes still fixed on the spot where the box should have been. But she said nothing. Inside, she felt a storm raging confusion, anger, and a deep, gnawing fear she couldn't shake. This isn't random, David continued, crossing his arms. We're being targeted, and I'm telling you right now, it's someone in this neighborhood. Emily didn't want to believe that. Willow Creek wasn't that kind of place. These were families, parents, retirees, people they'd known for years. They waved to each other every morning, shared cookies during holidays, and helped shovel driveways in the winter. But as she glanced around at the quiet houses, the neatly manicured lawns, and the closed blinds, she couldn't deny it anymore. Someone here was lying. Over the next few days, the tension between Emily and David grew heavier, spilling into every conversation. The missing packages weren't just an inconvenience anymore. They were threatening their livelihood. Their online business was small but growing, and each stolen delivery meant missed deadlines, unhappy customers, and mounting losses. Late at night, Emily would sit on the couch, scrolling through the angry emails from buyers, asking why their orders hadn't shipped yet. Every word cut deeper than the last. They had worked so hard to make this dream a reality, and now it felt like everything was slipping through their fingers. David, ever the problem solver, tried to find answers. He called the courier company, installed a new security app, and even set up motion alerts on their phones. But every time they thought they had the situation under control, another package would disappear. The neighborhood itself began to change. At first, no one talked about the thefts openly, but whispers started spreading like wildfire. At the mailbox, neighbors exchanged quiet glances instead of cheerful greetings. Parents warned their kids not to leave bikes outside overnight. People who once trusted each other completely were suddenly locking doors, closing blinds, and side-eyeing anyone who walked by. The peace Willow Creek had enjoyed for so long was unraveling thread by thread. Emily tried to reach out to Karen again, hoping she'd seen something, anything that could help. She walked over one afternoon trying to sound casual. "Hey," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Have you noticed any strange cars around lately? Or, I don't know, anyone hanging around the porches?" Karen paused, clutching a watering can, her knuckles white around the handle. She hesitated for just a fraction of a second before answering, and that hesitation burned itself into Emily's memory. "No," Karen said quickly, avoiding eye contact. "Haven't seen anything. Probably just delivery mix-ups. Happens all the time." Emily nodded slowly, her stomach sinking. She wanted to believe her, but something about Karen's tone felt wrong. It was too dismissive, too rehearsed, like she'd anticipated the question. Later that evening, Emily mentioned it to David as they cooked dinner. "She's hiding something," Emily whispered, slicing vegetables without looking up. "I know it. I can feel it." David sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "You think Karen's involved?" "I don't know," Emily admitted, "but I do know this. She knows more than she's saying." The paranoia only deepened when the security camera arrived. David spent an entire Saturday afternoon installing it above the porch, determined to catch whoever was responsible. That night, they sat on the couch scrolling through the app, testing the angles and reviewing the footage from the day. For a while, it worked. Every time a delivery came, Emily checked the app obsessively, refreshing the feed every hour. But the thief seemed to know. 2 packages came and went without incident, giving them a false sense of security. And then the third one vanished. When Emily opened the app to check the camera feed, her heart stopped. The package had been there at 2:15 p.m. and gone by 2:20 p.m. The recording showed a figure approaching the porch, head down, hoodie pulled up, moving quickly and deliberately. The image wasn't perfect, but there was no mistaking the jacket. David had seen it before, dozens of times, walking past their house. It was Mark's. Emily felt the world tilt beneath her as the realization sank in. Mark, their neighbor, Karen's husband. the quiet man who fixed fences and waved politely while mowing his lawn. Her hand trembled as she replayed the video again and again, hoping she was wrong. But there it was, his posture, his stride, the way he glanced back over his shoulder before disappearing out of frame. The betrayal cut deeper than she expected. For years, Emily and David had trusted Karen and Mark, welcomed them into their lives, and shared meals, laughs, and late-night conversations. And now it seemed they had been stealing from them deliberately, repeatedly, without shame. But the realization wasn't just painful. It was dangerous. Because if Mark had stolen from them once, he could do it again. And if Karen was covering for him, then the problem was bigger than a few missing packages. David wanted to confront them immediately, but Emily hesitated. Something about Karen's nervous behavior, the flicker of fear in her eyes, told her this was more complicated than it seemed. That night, as they lay awake in the dark, David whispered, "We can't keep this to ourselves anymore. We need proof. We need to know how deep this goes." Emily stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Part of her wanted to scream, to march across the street and demand answers. But another part of her was terrified at what she might uncover. She thought back to the late-night whispers, the closed blinds, the sudden tension in the neighborhood. If Mark and Karen weren't acting alone, then who else was involved? Because one thing was clear now, this wasn't just about stolen packages anymore. Something bigger was happening in Willow Creek, and Emily was determined to find out what. The footage from the security camera replayed on Emily's phone for what felt like the 100th time. Each time she watched, her chest tightened, her hands cold and clammy. There was no denying it now, the figure in the video was Mark. His jacket, his build, his unmistakable walk. The neighbor she once trusted completely was stealing from them. David stood at the window, staring across the street at Karen and Mark's house, his jaw locked tight. "We should confront him," he said, his voice low and steady, though his fists were clenched at his sides. Emily shook her head, clutching the phone to her chest. "Not yet. We need more than this. If we accuse him and he denies it, what happens then? We become the villains. The entire neighborhood turns against us. We need proof, David. Solid proof." David hesitated, his frustration simmering beneath the surface. "I don't care what the neighbors think. He's stealing from us. He's stealing our livelihood." Emily's voice dropped to a whisper. "And what if this isn't just about us?" David turned sharply. "What do you mean?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the closed blinds across the street. "What if Mark isn't the only one?" The next morning, Emily woke to the sound of her phone buzzing, a neighborhood group chat message flashing across the screen. "Another package gone. That's the 5th one this week." She opened the chat and scrolled through dozens of frantic messages from neighbors. One claimed her kids' new sneakers had been stolen. Another complained about missing prescription medications. Someone else accused delivery drivers of carelessness. But others weren't so sure. The entire street was buzzing with suspicion. Emily stared at the screen, her throat dry. It wasn't just her and David anymore. Whoever was behind this wasn't targeting them alone. And yet, she couldn't bring herself to share what she knew. Not yet. Later that afternoon, as Emily stepped onto the porch to collect the mail, she noticed Karen standing in her driveway. Their eyes met for the briefest second before Karen looked away, pretending to fidget with her garden hose. The gesture was so deliberate, so unnatural it made Emily's stomach twist. Summoning courage, Emily walked over, forcing her voice to sound casual. "Hey, Karen, did you see the group chat this morning?" Karen paused mid-motion, her knuckles tightening around the hose. Yeah, she said slowly. "It's terrible. I can't believe someone's doing this in our neighborhood." "Right," Emily said, her tone measured. "Terrible." She studied Karen's face carefully, looking for any sign of guilt, but Karen's expression was unreadable, her soft smile practiced and polite. For a moment there was silence between them, broken only by the distant hum of cicadas. Then Karen said quietly, "People are starting to point fingers, you know. I heard someone say they think it's teenagers. Emily nodded, forcing a small smile, though her stomach churned. Karen was lying. She knew it. That night, Emily and David sat at the kitchen table, the weight of everything pressing down on them. "We need a plan," David said, spreading out printed delivery logs and receipts on the table. "We can't afford to lose any more inventory. If this keeps up, we're finished." Emily stared at the papers, her mind spinning. "We'll set up another camera," she said finally. "A hidden one. If we catch him again, we'll have undeniable proof." And so they did. David bought a small, discreet camera and tucked it into the flower pot on the porch, angled perfectly toward the steps. Days passed, and Emily checked the app obsessively, each delivery making her heart pound with anticipation and dread. Then, on a humid Wednesday afternoon, it happened again. The package arrived at 11:42 a.m. By noon, it was gone. Emily grabbed her phone, opened the app, and there it was, clear as day. Mark. Again. But this time, something was different. In the corner of the frame, just beyond Mark's shoulder, Emily spotted movement, another figure, half hidden behind the hedges. When she zoomed in, her breath caught. It was Karen. She was watching, standing perfectly still, just far enough away to stay out of the camera's focus, but close enough to see everything. Emily's stomach dropped. Karen wasn't just covering for Mark, she was part of it. The betrayal ran deeper than Emily had ever imagined. Her mind raced with questions she couldn't answer. Why would they do this? They had good jobs, stable lives at least. That's what everyone thought. Were they desperate for money? Was it greed? Or was something bigger at play? Emily shared the footage with David, and his reaction was immediate. "That's it," he said firmly. "We're going to the police." But Emily hesitated. Something about Karen's behavior nagged at her, the nervousness, the distance, the way she seemed trapped between guilt and fear. "I'm not so sure this is just about packages," Emily whispered. "There's something else here, David. I can feel it." That evening, unable to sleep, Emily sat by the window, staring across the street at Karen and Mark's house. The blinds were drawn, but faint light leaked through the cracks. Shadows moved inside, frantic, pacing shadows, like people arguing. Then she saw it. Karen stepping outside onto the porch, glancing nervously in every direction before pulling out her phone. She spoke quickly, looking over her shoulder repeatedly, as though terrified of being seen. Emily couldn't hear the conversation, but the fear on Karen's face was unmistakable. The next day, whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. People were dividing into factions. Some believed the thief was an outsider. Others suspected delivery drivers, while a growing number quietly wondered if the culprit was one of their own. And then came the confrontation. David had had enough. That evening, as Mark stepped out to take out the trash, David crossed the street without hesitation. "Hey, Mark," he said, his voice steady but cold. Mark froze, his grip tightening on the trash bag. "David," he said flatly. David held up his phone, the paused video on the screen showing Mark's face in the frame. "Care to explain this?" For a long, tense moment, Mark said nothing. His jaw worked, his eyes narrowing, his entire posture rigid. Finally, he muttered, "You don't know what you think you know." Before David could reply, Karen appeared in the doorway, her face pale, her voice trembling. "Mark! Inside! Now!" David stared at them both, searching their faces for answers. But all he saw was fear. As Mark disappeared into the house, Karen met David's eyes for the briefest second. There was something unspoken there, a warning, maybe even a plea, before she shut the door firmly behind her. That night, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something far bigger was happening. Mark and Karen weren't just stealing packages, they were hiding something. Something neither of them could afford to let anyone discover. The question wasn't if she'd find out the truth anymore. It was when. And deep down, Emily knew one thing for certain: once she uncovered it, Willow Creek would never be the same. Emily couldn't sleep. The house was silent, but her mind was louder than ever, racing with fragments of conversations, flashes of video footage, and the haunting image of Karen watching from behind the hedges while Mark stole the package. Something about it didn't make sense. If Mark was stealing, why wasn't Karen stopping him? Why was she there, standing in plain sight, almost supervising him? Was she complicit, or was she terrified? Emily leaned against the window, her arms folded tightly, staring at the faint glow spilling out from Karen and Mark's house across the street. Shadows moved frantically inside two figures, pacing, gesturing, arguing. The muffled rise and fall of their voices carried faintly through the still night air, too indistinct to make out, but enough to confirm what Emily already suspected. Something was unraveling inside that home. The next morning, David had had enough. He slammed his coffee mug onto the counter and turned to Emily, his expression grim. "This stops today. We're not waiting for another package to disappear. We have them on camera. We know it's Mark. It's time to confront them directly, no more games." Emily hesitated. "David, we don't know everything yet. What if—" "No." David cut her off sharply. "We know enough. And if we don't act now, they'll keep doing it to us, to everyone on this street. Enough is enough." The firmness in his voice left no room for argument. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the streets in golden shadows, David and Emily walked across the street together. Emily's heart pounded so hard it hurt. She could barely feel the ground beneath her feet. When they reached Karen and Mark's porch, David knocked hard, his jaw clenched tight. The door opened slowly, revealing Karen. Her face was pale, her lips pressed into a tight line, her eyes darting nervously between them. "Oh, hi," she said softly, forcing a fragile smile. "Where's Mark?" David's voice was sharp, cold. Karen hesitated, opening her mouth to answer, but before she could, Mark appeared behind her. He leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. David didn't waste time. He pulled out his phone, opening the security footage, and held it up to Mark's face. "This," David said firmly, his voice shaking with restrained anger. "This is you, on our porch, taking what doesn't belong to you." For a long moment, no one spoke. The only sound was the distant chirping of crickets and the soft whir of air conditioners humming along the street. Then Mark said quietly, his voice low and controlled, "Delete it." Emily blinked, confused. "What?" Mark stepped forward, his jaw tight. "Delete the video." David let out a humorless laugh. "You think I'm going to delete the proof? Are you serious?" But Mark wasn't smiling, his shoulders tensed, his eyes narrowing, the tension in the air thick enough to choke on. "Listen carefully," Mark said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, low and threatening. "You don't know what's going on here. You think this is about your packages, but it's not. Walk away now, before you regret it." Emily felt a cold wave wash over her. Something in Mark's tone wasn't just defensive, it was desperate, almost pleading. Karen's hand trembled as she reached out to grip Mark's arm. "Mark," she whispered, her voice shaking. "Please, stop." For a second, Mark's mask cracked. The anger in his eyes faltered, replaced by something Emily couldn't quite read: fear. They didn't stay. David grabbed Emily's hand and pulled her back across the street, his entire body tense with fury. "That's it," he said, his voice trembling, as he slammed the front door behind them. "I'm done. I'm calling the police." Emily's breath caught. "David, wait. You heard him. There's something more going on here. What if we make it worse?" David stared at her, his jaw set. It's already worse. He's threatening us now. It's not just theft anymore, it's intimidation." She didn't argue this time. The police arrived later that night. 2 officers stood in their living room, reviewing the footage on David's phone. One of them, a tall man with a calm demeanor, nodded slowly. "This is pretty clear," he said, glancing at his partner. "We'll need statements from both of you. We'll handle it from here." But before they left, the second officer hesitated, lowering his voice slightly. "Look, you should know something. You're not the first ones to report something like this on this street. There have been complaints filed, but nothing sticks. People get scared. They back out. Emily frowned. Scared of what? The officer hesitated, then shook his head. Just be careful. The next day, the ripple effect hit Willow Creek like a storm. Word of the confrontation spread quickly. Neighbors who once exchanged cheerful greetings now gathered in tense little clusters, whispering in low voices. Some defended Karen and Mark, insisting they'd never do such a thing. Others quietly admitted they'd suspected them for weeks. The trust that once bound the community together was gone. Karen stopped leaving the house altogether. Curtains drawn, lights off, blinds closed. The once friendly open home across the street now looked like a fortress. But late one night, Emily spotted movement again. She stood quietly by the window, hidden behind her own curtains, and watched as Karen stepped outside onto the porch, barefoot, clutching her phone. She looked around nervously, then dialed a number, pacing frantically. For nearly 15 minutes, Karen whispered into the phone, pausing occasionally to wipe tears from her face. Emily couldn't hear the words, but the image burned into her mind. 2 days later, the police came back this time to arrest Mark. The flashing blue and red lights painted the quiet street in chaos as officers escorted him out in handcuffs. Karen stood on the porch, her face pale and streaked with tears, her hands trembling as she clutched the doorframe. Neighbors gathered in small groups, some watching with shock, others with a grim sort of satisfaction. Emily stood frozen in her doorway, her breath shallow, watching as the man she once trusted was placed into the back of a police car. But even as Mark was driven away, Karen's gaze met Emily's across the street, and in that brief, silent moment, Emily saw something she didn't expect: relief. It was subtle, fleeting, but unmistakable. And in that instant, Emily understood. Karen had been trapped. She wasn't an accomplice. She was a prisoner, bound by fear, silenced by secrets she couldn't share. In the days that followed, more details emerged. Mark had been drowning in debt, thousands of dollars lost to gambling, credit cards maxed out, their savings depleted. He had stolen the packages to sell the contents online, desperate to stay afloat. Karen, terrified and powerless, had tried to cover for him at first, but when the theft spiraled out of control, she didn't know how to escape. Emily sat on her porch one evening, the weight of everything finally sinking in. The betrayal, the anger, the heartbreak, but also the realization that people were rarely just what they seemed on the surface. Pressing charges against Mark wasn't easy. It meant tension. It meant dividing the neighborhood. It meant losing the illusion of safety they clung to for so long. But Emily and David did it anyway, because some lines couldn't be crossed. And as the police investigation continued, Willow Creek slowly began to heal, but the scars would remain. Trust, once broken, is hard to rebuild. And for Emily, every package delivered to her doorstep would forever carry a reminder. Sometimes the people you trust the most are hiding the darkest secrets. The entire neighborhood had been buzzing for days. Whispers carried from door to door, like a quiet storm moving through the streets. For weeks, trust had been shattered, alliances tested, and hidden tensions had erupted into full-blown chaos. But now, the dust was finally beginning to settle. Karen and her husband, once the friendly couple everyone waved to, were no longer just neighbors. They had become the face of betrayal, the people everyone whispered about but avoided. After the security footage came out and the police confirmed everything, the reality hit the community like a cold slap. The couple they once trusted had been stealing from the very people who had welcomed them with open arms. The aftermath was brutal. Karen's husband was charged with multiple counts of theft. He sat silently in court, his hands trembling, while Karen wept quietly in the back row. Every stolen package was accounted for, every victim notified, and every single resident carried a heavy mix of anger and disbelief in their hearts. For the narrator, though, the ending was bittersweet. Yes, the truth had finally come out. Justice had been served, but something deeper had been lost, something that could never be replaced. The sense of community, The simple faith in a friendly wave or a borrowed cup of sugar had been shattered. The block where kids once rode their bikes and neighbors swapped recipes now felt different. Every closed door seemed heavier, every locked gate a reminder of what happened. Trust, once broken, doesn't return easily. But the narrator knew one thing for certain: silence breeds chaos. If they had ignored the missing packages, if they had turned a blind eye to Karen's strange behavior, the thefts would have continued, maybe gotten worse. It was only by staying vigilant, by standing together, that the community had exposed the truth. And yet a quiet sadness lingered. In the back of everyone's mind was the same haunting question: how many more secrets still hide behind these doors? The story of Karen and her husband had finally reached its end, but the echoes of what happened lingered like a shadow over the neighborhood. A simple act of trust had been broken, a bond between neighbors shattered, and what seemed like an ordinary street had been turned into a battleground of secrets, betrayal, and consequences. The narrator takes a deep breath, leaning forward as if speaking directly to every viewer watching, the tone heavy with meaning. This could happen anywhere. Maybe it already has. Maybe it's happening right now on your street, in your building, in the house next door. The camera slowly zooms in, intensifying the weight of the moment. But the real question is, what would you do if it happened to you? Would you stay silent and hope it stops? Or would you stand up, risk everything, and fight for the truth even if it tears your community apart? The silence after the question is deliberate, stretching just long enough to let the thoughts sink deep. Package theft, betrayal, broken trust. These stories are more than just drama. They're warnings, reminders that danger often hides in plain sight. And maybe, just maybe, sharing your story could save someone else from living this nightmare. The narrator pauses again, softer this time, almost a whisper. So tell me, have you ever faced something like this? Have you ever been betrayed by someone you thought you could trust? Share your experience in the comments below, because your voice, your truth, might be the very thing someone else needs to hear tonight. And then, with one final surge of energy, the narrator delivers the closing blow, the moment designed to pull viewers deeper into the world of shades of truth. And if you want more real stories like this, stories that dig into the secrets, the lies, and the moments that change everything, hit subscribe and turn on notifications. There are so many untold truths waiting to be uncovered, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The screen fades to black, leaving behind nothing but a lingering unease, and the unspoken promise that more shocking stories lie just beyond the next click.